All right. Cops lie. Cops lie. They lie. I have been in court on several occasions, and the police officers involved have got up on the stand and told bold-faced lies. Now, in one instance, the judge saw through their lies, and basically my own attorney didn't even get a chance to get at them because the judge basically jumped on them and caught all three of the cops in their lies. Now, the judge basically, well, not basically, the judge found me not guilty, dismissed the case. The judge did admonish all three of the cops, but the judge also admonished me and told me that I should have taken the route of least resistance, which meant that I should have allowed my civil rights to be violated. Not being totally stupid, I kept my mouth shut and said, yes, Your Honor, and walked out of court a free man. But this particular story basically is going to focus on the fact that if you lie and they catch you in a lie, you are going to be prosecuted for perjury. Perjury, I'm sorry. If a cop lies and they catch them in a lie, they basically walk out of court with no ramifications whatsoever. Now, I have made previous videos where I have specifically come out and said that if a police officer testifies about something, that there needs to be a secondary source of evidence to back up that testimony, because police officers lie. And the prosecutors know that they lie, but they go along with them anyway, so they're basically suborning perjury. They should be prosecuted as well. Now, in my opinion, we should create a law specifically for this issue. Now, they talk about the overreach, Republicans, too many laws, blah, 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 blah. That's bullshit. In this particular case, we should create a law that when a police officer lies on the stand, they should be prosecuted. Okay? Now, that prosecution doesn't mean that they will be found guilty, but they should be prosecuted, because sometimes a police officer will get up on a stand and he will make an honest mistake. I mean, we're all human. But there are so many instances where they get up there and out lie, okay, and they know they're lying, that and they face no consequences whatsoever, that there's no penalty. So why not just get up there and lie? It's just like these police reports they fill out. In the McDonald case in Chicago, they filled out these police reports that made it seem that this boy was a giant terror and everybody was in total fear of their lives. Well, that didn't wash when the video came out. First of all, they knew it didn't wash, because if everybody was in terror, how come only one officer shot? And one officer shot 16 times. And that officer that shot 16 times, only 2 of those rounds entered that young man's body while he was standing. The other 14 rounds entered his body while he was prone, already dead. But all the police reports matched up. So the video showed that everybody was lying. What was the ramifications of that? Yeah, the one guy who shot that boy and murdered that boy is going to go on trial. And yeah, they probably are going to get him. You know, let's you know, with the political atmosphere, especially in Chicago the way it is, he's going to do some time. But what about those other 15 or 16 officers that filled out police reports, which are official documents, their official legal documents, and they lied on those official legal documents, what penalty do they face? As of today, it's 0. We need to establish laws that when police officers or government officials lie, purposely lie on official legal documents or under oath in court, that they are automatically prosecuted. Now, whether they win or not, I don't know. But they should not have the protection of the police departments or the police unions. They should be prosecuted as lying under oath and prosecuted as an individual citizen committing perjury. So they should not have the full faith of the Chicago Police Department, Chicago government of Illinois, or government of the United States. When they lie, a lie is an individual decision. It's not a police department decision, okay? It's not a state legislative decision. That's an individual personal decision, and they should be prosecuted as individuals. Now, I'm going to play this clip from the Roland Martin show. And again, I do a lot of these, especially on Roland Martin show, because there are very few black media outlets. And I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not doing it for the views. I'm doing it to get information out there as to what's going on. But we need to step up. We need to prosecute these cops that are lying. If necessary, we need to in some way, shape, manner, or form, elect a special prosecutor that does nothing but prosecute these police officers, and they need to be elected every 2 years. We need to review their records to see exactly what their prosecution and conviction rate is, and if we can determine that they're pulling their punches, we need to get their asses out of there and somebody in there that's going to take care of business to the point that there's no work for them to do.
Folks, Chicago Police Department, we focused on them quite some time on this particular show. Now an explosive story about the Chicago Tribune reveals more than a dozen examples where Chicago police officers have taken the stand and given false testimony, but basically gotten off. Because of this, police officers can testify in court with little fear of prosecution or discipline. The U.S. Department of Justice is currently conducting a civil rights investigation of the Chicago Police Department. They have requested that the Cook County Public Defender's Office report any case with evidence that officers made false testimony in court. The only exception to this underlying rule is in cases where video proves testimony of a cop to be false. In those few cases, prosecutors have acted to reprimand those officers. But what about the many cases in Chicago where there's no video? Will cops in Chicago continue to lie in court without any charges of perjury? Joining us via FaceTime is one of the reporters who wrote the story for the Chicago Tribune, Steve Mills. Steve, here's what is stunning to lots of people when you think about this here. If you did this or I did this, we would get prosecuted for perjury, lying on the stand. For these police officers, it's simply standard operating procedure.
Well, I think saying standard operating procedure is going a little bit too far. We found a number of cases where judges had raised questions about a police officer's testimony, and you're right, nothing appears to have happened to the police officers for that kind of testimony.
The reason I'm saying it's standard operating procedure because we see other cases as well where essentially police officers are getting away with things that a regular, ordinary citizen would never get away with. And the problem is they have the badge, they have the gun. DAs often don't want to prosecute them. There's tremendous amount of trust that juries as well as judges put on the word of a police officer. And so if you're a cop and you know the system pretty much can protect me, I can pretty much do what I want.
And that's exactly what they do. Because you can see where DAs don't want to prosecute dirty cops, when they kill people and you can see it on video and it's a no-brainer, they won't prosecute them then. They go out of their way to protect them. So you know damn well they're not going to prosecute any police officer for perjury. So, and the judges even, you know, they basically say it in court that when it's a decision between you and the cop, they always say that, you know, they have to take the police officer's word for it instead of yours. And especially when the police officer is lying. So something needs to be done, okay? We can no longer take a police officer's word for something. In my opinion, there must be evidence, physical evidence, to back up his word. And if there's no physical evidence, there's just his word, then you have to make your own decision whether you believe the cop or not. And the judge's instruction should be that you can place no more weight on the police officer's testimony without evidence than you do about a defendant or another witness's testimony regarding evidence.
Well, you're right that there's sort of a built-in trust of police officers that when they take the witness stand, I think they walk in with a little bit more trust than a defendant does if it's going to be a credibility contest between the two. You know, we got started on this because after the Laquan McDonald shooting, there were a lot of questions about the police reports that a lot of the officers had written about what had happened.
Exactly.
They were at odds with the video that everybody saw. And so we wanted to look at what happens in court, and we found some problems here.
And so we talk about finding these problems. What actually took place, and what was the response from the police department, from the mayor's office, from Cook County State's Attorney's office?
Well, what we found were a number of cases where police officers gave testimony and judges just found it incredible. And in some cases, they even said so. A lot of judges will just say, you know, not guilty, or they'll throw out some evidence, and they won't make a big speech about it. But we found some cases where judges were very pointed in their remarks and said, you know, I don't believe this testimony, this police officer is not telling the truth, something like that. Now, what happened was, as you said before, absolutely nothing. The cases were not referred to the police department, or the prosecutors didn't report them to supervisors. Nothing really happened. In many cases, the police officer didn't even know how the judges ruled because the judges would rule later. And so they weren't even in court to find out. The cases just went away, and there were no repercussions, as you said.
And since your story came out, what has happened? What are you hearing? What are they saying?
Well, the state's attorney's office has issued what it's called disclosure notices in some cases. Those are notices that are meant to notify the defense that a police officer has had his credibility questioned. It's not clear that anything else is, that the state attorney's office is going to look at some of these cases. There's no indication the police department is doing anything at this point.
And
There needs to be a list generated of police officers when they get caught lying, and that list needs to be publicly disclosed so that when a defense attorney is going up against a prosecutor who is using one of these known to be liar police officers, that information is public, and that the defense needs to make a judge, well, the judge should be aware, but also make a jury aware that the police officer is a known liar.
That even with this investigation, that something positive will result. What is the mayor saying? What is the new police chief saying?
They haven't said anything about this at all, and it's unclear what will happen. One of the things that a task force the mayor appointed pointed out, pointed after the Laquan McDonald shooting, they pointed out that there were questions about how police officers testified, and it's unclear whether anything will really change. I mean, they suggested that there was a systemic need, or a systemic overhaul was needed. And
doesn't this, and granted, I'm not being a reporter, not giving commentary, but this, I would believe, lends credence to what you hear from residents when they say we can't trust the Chicago Police Department, not just when it comes to what happens on the streets, but even when we go into the courtroom, when residents say we know they're doing wrong, we know what they're saying is not true, but we can't get a fair shake because the system simply will not treat them the same as they would any other citizen.
It ain't just Chicago, hell, it's LA, It's New York, it's Detroit, it's Dallas, it's Houston, it's every major city and a whole lot of minor cities, smaller cities, where the cops will just go in there and lie. Okay, they will lie through their goddamn teeth, and the judges even know it, but they part of the system and they just let, half the time or most of the time, they just let the shit go through. And, you know, it's only when the lies are so incredulous that even, you know, the judges, you know, they got to shake their head and say, hell no, I just can't let this happen. I was one of those where the lies were so ridiculous that the judge just put his head down and then lifted his head up, and then that's when he started going after the cops that were lying. So, but those cases are few and far between, you know. And I'm saying maybe most of the judges are pretty much honest, but they just let a lot of shit go. But this shit needs to stop. You know, if you got a cop with a badge and a gun and he's got all the authority and all the power, well, hell, he needs to be held to a higher accountability. And especially, you know, if he gets caught lying, he needs to have definitive action taken against his ass, up to and including firing someone, especially if you're talking about a case where somebody is accused of a murder or a crime that basically will have the ability to destroy that person's life. There has to be a pro quo as far as that's concerned. If his false testimony is going to destroy someone, the ramifications of that false testimony should basically destroy him or her.
Well, in fact, we heard from a lot of people after the story ran who said they had very similar experiences in court, that a police officer had come in and given testimony that was simply incredible. It's something that really tarnishes the entire criminal justice system and makes it difficult. Judges told us, you know, widely that they all know this happens, but it's sometimes difficult to know if a police officer is simply mistaken in his testimony or if they're not telling the truth or if they're just shading the truth. It's tough to know sometimes unless there's video or unless there's some other sort of independent witness. A lot of these cases, especially these drug cases, are the testimony of a police officer against the testimony of a defendant. And in those cases, judges often side with the police officer.
Well, and of course, in the Laquan McDonald case, the reason that's interesting, the cops, they were all telling the same story until we see the video, which told a completely different story.
That's correct. The video was dramatically at odds with reports that a number of the officers at the scene made. And that's one of the things that piqued our interest. We wanted to look at how often does this kind of thing happen, and the best place to look at that is in court.
All right.
And don't forget, in that Laquan McDonald case, the cops knew that the video was going to get them, so they went into a Burger King and snatched out the video that Burger King had done of that boy coming through that parking lot, which was at odds with the information that these cops had put down in a police report. So not only, you know, were they lying, they tampered with evidence. And no ramifications whatsoever. So, you know, we need to get up on this. I mean, people, this happens to black people, it happens to white people, happens to Hispanic people, happens to Asian people, it happens to Muslim people, it happens to everybody. You know, it's basically the people against the cops. And we as the people need to hold these cops accountable. And when they get caught lying, we need to hold their feet to the goddamn fire. And until we do that, we are going to continue to have problems. We need to get rid of all of these quote unquote bad cops. The good cops need to be able to let us know who the bad ones are so we can get them the hell out of there. Once the, you know, pretty much all the bad cops are out, our confidence level and our willingness and ability to have to work with the remaining cops should rise or go up astronomically so that the system is better. But while the system is the way that it is currently, fuck the police. You heard it first. See what his panel basically is going to say about the situation, which we pretty much know, but I just like corroboration for my own views and opinions.
Our panel here is Quentin James, founding partner of Vested Strategies, Angela Peoples, co-director for Get Equal, and Paris Gennard, GOP communication strategist. Folks, look, this says all you need to say. That again, if you're a resident and you are expecting fairness in the criminal justice system, and this is not in Chicago, when cops will go on that stand and will lie to shade the truth, and people are going to jail getting convicted because of police officers lying.
Well, there's a reasonable expectation to believe that when you go into court and a police officer, an officer of the court goes there and testifies that they're going to do so honorably and honestly. And now police officers know, the corrupt ones know, that they have a higher burden to prove that they can say that people will judge what they say to a higher extent and believe what they're going to say. And in these cases, they're lying. And so it's hard for children to look at police officers the same way. And I think the last point is this. Other police officers, good, honorable police officers, and police unions need to stand up and say, this is wrong, we're against it, this is not what we stand for. And until that happens, you won't see real change.
And the reality is you're not going to hear the union
You're not at all.
come out and say, you know what, this report, this is shameful, because they will not call out fellow officers.
They're not going to come out and call fellow officers. And I also think that this speaks to, so much, we hear so much pushback about Black Lives Matter, Police Lives Matter, and, talking about police officers put their lives on the line, and we really hold them to this higher standard, put them on this pillar, and then you see time and time again, they do not live up to this, appointed position of power and authority that then gives them the ability to really ruin people's lives in a way that is just so affront to the system that we're all told to be committed to.
And, I would say one amazing thing about this story is that in spite of the challenges that we're seeing from the police department, young people in Chicago still have some faith in our government. We saw a few months ago when Black Lives Matter and Black Youth Project organized young people to come out and vote against Anita Alvarez in that election in Chicago, that people are still understand the power of their vote and the power to change this system, hopefully for the better moving forward.
But I think the question for me is really what you asked, Roland. What has Rahm Emanuel, the mayor, said? What are the rest of the leaders in Chicago saying? There seems to be a real death of silence from an action from our leaders who have been at the forefront of not only the Democratic Party and politics, but of the national conversation. And leading on this issue, I think Rahm Emanuel has some serious questions to answer, and if not even stepping down, resigning at this point.
Well, again, this is where you want to see leadership.
Right.
And when the mayor says nothing, when the police chief says nothing, when the union says nothing, and these are folks who are paid by taxpayers.
Absolutely.
These are folks who are supposed to protect and serve the public as opposed to themselves. And imagine, this is only a handful of cases here. Imagine if you had an up and down review of these cases, you probably would find a hell of a lot more. And then you wonder why people don't trust the police, and then you wonder why residents say, yeah, we want to see cops held accountable. But then people say, oh no, you shouldn't protest, you shouldn't do that. Well, Exhibit A.
Well, when the mayor and the police unions and the police chief say nothing, then the people have to say something.
Right.
And the way we can say that is through our vote. And we have to, this is why those local elections that you always preach about are so critically important, holding these politicians and these other people of authority accountable.
But I think we also have to be critical of policing and the criminal justice system across the board, and looking at not only sort of where there's lying, where there's discrepancies, but also looking at who we're putting in the positions of power to address that and to actually create these reforms. We talk a lot about the special prosecutors and these sort of community policing boards, but really thinking about if the corruption and if the issues run as deep as we're seeing that they do in policing, what are some of the alternatives that we need to do to really not just reform but transform this system?
Well, and again, it's very interesting because last night, the idiotic Bill O'Reilly goes off on President Obama praising Black Lives Matter in his speech at Howard University. But it's interesting, you're not going to hear Bill O'Reilly condemn these Chicago officers.
Exactly.
You're not going to hear him do a talking points memo talking about lying cops. Because, see, this is exactly why BYP 100 in Chicago has been protesting. This is why Black Lives Matter and others have been protesting. They've been protesting these type of things. And so when the likes of O'Reilly condemn the president and others for praising Black Lives Matter, the fact of the matter is this here. Okay, if you really want to backtrack this whole deal here, this Chicago Tribune report doesn't happen without the Laquan McDonald uprising.
Absolutely.
The Laquan McDonald uprising doesn't happen without the protest. That doesn't happen unless you have police officers who are not doing their job. And this is why, when it comes to people like Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and the rest of them, why they have no credibility to me, because they are just the same as these trifling police unions.
Absolutely.
And elected officials who never want to say anything. They'll be quick to condemn protesters, but they will never condemn cops.
Exactly, because, and I'll give you one prime example. I don't remember the cop's name, but he was that dirty cop in Illinois, and what happened was he was getting busted for stealing money from youth programs. So anyway, he goes up and gives out some kind of a phony radio transmission, and then commits suicide, trying to link black people to his death when he committed suicide, okay? Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly and Fox News went crazy, and they were trying to blame his death on the Black Lives Matter people, and it was black people this and black people that, etc., etc., etc. When the truth finally came out, you didn't hear a peep from them about apologizing as far as them attempting to condemn the Black Lives Matter movement. I'll give you a second one. Police officer down in Houston gets shot by a black person, black man. The black man had mental issues. All they did was rain down, oh, this was Black Lives Matter, blah, 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 blah. They condemned the Black Lives Matter movement. They referenced the Black Lives Matter chapter up in Minnesota that was chanting pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon, which was, that was it tasteful? No, it was tasteful, but a lot of people didn't know that the cops were walking along with them and they were chanting right along with them, but that part wouldn't be publicized. But anyway, back to the Houston side of it, they were trying to link this guy to the Black Lives Matter movement to the point that the Fox people had that guy's police chief on, and the police chief initially discounted it, but I guess somebody pulled his coattail. So a couple of days later, though he didn't say it, he didn't disagree with Black Lives Matter involvement. To this day, the person who obviously is in jail and is obviously going on trial for the death of the cop, to this day, that person has never said he had any affiliation with the Black Lives Matter movement, and they know it. But once the horse is out of the gate, there's nothing that they are willing to do in order to try to mitigate their statements. Third, that Cleavon Bundy bullshit in Nevada. Sean Hannity was all up that guy's ass, loving that guy. He was inciting citizens to riot, basically to shoot federal officers. When they found out what kind of a prick Cleavon Bundy was, Sean Hannity's ass slinked back to his studio, and you don't hear another word out of his mouth about Cleavon Bundy. And even when Bundy's two kids went up to Oregon, screwing with the BLM up in Oregon, and they got arrested, and they caught Bundy going up there. Now all three of them, Bundy and his two sons, are in jail. You don't hear shit from Fox as far as denigrating them for doing what they're doing. So But that's getting off the issue. It's the cops that you got to deal with. And Fox is a pro cop. Cops can do no wrong. Fuck everybody else. Side with the cops. I'm not riding in that parade. I know from personal experience, being an African American, that the cops will lie, and they will lie just as fast on me as anybody else, because cops are not for the people. Cops are for the cops.
They'll be quick to say, oh, you shouldn't be out there interrupting anything, but they will not say a word about lying police officers who go on the stand, who take the oath, who commit perjury, and then nothing ever happens to them. That's why, to me, they have no credibility to question anything dealing with Black Lives Matter.
Well, and we also wouldn't have seen the videotapes if there weren't these protests. We also wouldn't have all of this additional information. We actually have to not only go demand accountability, but also then push for more evidence to come out. We have to actually push for the not just the police officers, to be honest, but for the prosecutors, for the mayor, for them to actually disclose this information. And you don't see any of that if people are not in the streets. And so thinking about the pushback and the pressure that folks in the Black Lives Matter movement, but across the board are getting from being as active in the streets is not, the reality is we're actually doing a service for our democracy and exposing all of the corruption and all of the flaws that are in this system.
Roland, back to your point, you can be pro-America, pro-First Defender, pro-police, and still criticize and point out things that are wrong.
Absolutely.
And until they do that, to your point, you won't have credibility with certain swaths of the community. Exactly. So if you want to make inroads, you want people to listen to you and say that you have some type of mantle or credibility to talk about these issues, be real. Call a spade a spade.
But they're not going to do it, because then that requires people them having a conscience. And the reality is they don't give a damn about Black lives.
No.
They don't care about what's happening to regular folks out there, because they would rather support and defend the police at every turn. And you're absolutely right. I have no problem defending police officers. There are many officers I know who are doing a great job. But my problem is this here. When you have cops where it is proven that they are lying, when you have the likes of John Burge, who sat there and tortured Black men and sent them to prison, and they were innocent, and then you have people like O'Reilly who will condemn for somebody else for protesting, but not condemn the action. They say, well, that's just a couple of bad apples. I'm sorry. If one person goes to prison because of a lying cop, then that's just simply one too many. Exactly. Simple as that. Folks,
Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, fuck the police until they get their act cleaned up. We need to have some kind of referendum on the local level that puts into place a law that when a cop is caught lying, that he is automatically prosecuted. And we need to have a special prosecutor that does nothing but prosecutes cops, okay? Now, whether he's assigned, okay, or elected, I don't know which way to go. And I'm thinking more the assigned versus the elected part of it. But then again, with the elected part of it, you have oversight. If he's letting cops off, you can always get rid of him and put somebody else in place. On the assigned side of it, there could be liaisons, and if people get upset with them, they just assign another prosecutor that's going to do the same thing. I honestly believe that position should be answerable to the people. So, but you more than likely have your own opinion about this, but again, lying cops, nothing new.